My name is Kwame Mbalia, author of the Tristan Strong series, coming to you live slightly with a little bit of a delay from Raleigh, North Carolina, in my wonderful, slightly messy home office. Yes, you too can create if you're a little bit messy. So today I am going to talk a little bit about Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky with a sneak peek of Tristan Strong Destroys the World. And I wanted to read a section of this book that is very near and dear to my heart because it is the very first scene that I ever wrote for this book. Even though it happens in the third chapter, this is the very first 200 to 300 words that I wrote for this book. I knew I needed this in this book. Tristan Strong is a African-American boy who is dealing with grief and sorrow. And so he has been sent by his parents down to his grandparents' farm. It's a new place. It's scary. There's no Wi-Fi. Things are terrible. And then he meets someone very intriguing whose name is Gum Baby. In the Anansi tales, Gum Baby was a doll Anansi used to trap an African fairy while he was on a quest. But in the story, the doll remained silent and wore leaves for clothes. This one, on the other hand, had on a black turtleneck and black pants, but her tiny feet were bare. And what were those stains she was tracking across the floor? "Hey, Gum Baby's talking to you, big boy." The doll marched across the floor, the serious expression on her face ruined by the plopping sound each of her footsteps made. "Don't make Gum Baby climb up there." Plop, plop, plop. "Is Gum Baby talking to a brick wall?" Plop, plop, plop. "Oh, you're asking for it now." Plop, plop, plop. She was up the side of the bed and leaving dark stains on the blankets by the time I finally shook myself out of the daze and extended the flashlight like a weapon. Who are you?" I whispered. The 10-inch doll glared at me, climbed atop my foot, and struck a pose. Both chubby arms spread wide. One foot planted on my big toe. She laughed in her tiny voice. "You want to know who Gum Baby is? Gum Baby is the reason you sleep with the door locked. Gum Baby is the reason the sun runs away across the sky. Gum Baby is your nightmare, and people whisper her name and tremble around the world." "Shh," I said, waving both arms in warning. "You're going to wake up my grandparents." Gum Baby cocked her head and looked at me like I'd just slapped her. "Did you," she began, "did you just shush Gum Baby? Didn't you hear the introduction and being a nightmare and all that? And you locking your door? Did that not make sense?" "No, it made sense. It's just..." "Should Gum Baby clarify?" No, it's fine. I just don't want..." "Oh, good. In that case, Gum Baby will go upside your head if you ever think about shushing her again." Gum Baby scrambled across my lap and flailed at my chest with both sticky hands. "Let another shush come out of that mouth. Let it. It will be the last shush your shush maker will ever shushify." And that is Gum Baby. I wanted to write Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky for a couple of reasons. The first and foremost, I grew up listening to African-American folktales, African folktales. I was one of four who we shared a bedroom, and, 4 kids in one room trying to get them to go to bed at night. It was, wild and tough. So my parents would play stories on a cassette player. They would play the Anansi tales, and we would listen to them. And, I would dream about Anansi and all his trickster games and all of the different shenanigans that he would get into. So I wanted to write a story that involved those characters, but to bring it forward for, readers today, my children, students, young adults, kids, like the readers who are reading it right now. But the other reason that I wanted to write this book was because Tristan is dealing with grief. He has lost someone close to him, someone who he loves and cherishes and who meant the world to him. That was his best friend. about 6 months before I started writing this book, my father died. And so writing about how Tristan dealt with his grief throughout the book helped me help myself and also help my daughters go through the grief of losing their grandfather. So it's a two-part answer, and I love this answer because it involves both dealing with grief and also dealing with wonder and joy, two sides of a coin, and something that I think we should present to readers like you as much as we can to show you that the world is not always high and the world is not always low, but how we deal with the changes between both. The theme of this year's festival, American Ingenuity, is something that I think is incredibly relative because at first glance, when we think of ingenuity, we're thinking of, inventions or creativity, how, finding new ways to do things, working with what we have instead of what we want to be using. Currently, in this pandemic, holding a virtual festival rather than gathering together because we want to be safe, but also still bring you the joy of reading, is using our ingenuity and to find ways to share what we love, what we've created with fans of it. Specifically within the book, Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky, I find that Tristan uses ingenuity to battle. So, and I use that in quotes. He finds ways to overcome these challenges in using creative means. For example, Tristan is a storyteller, right? Tristan uses the power of stories, and he uses the elements of stories in order to overcome obstacles. And if that's not, ingenuity, then I don't know what is. My favorite folktale, I think, has to be the stories involving High John the Conqueror. And the reason for that is because there are what are called John tales. The figure of John, this person who kind of outsmarts at some points he's a slave and he outsmarts, his slave master. In other parts, he's a free man, with superpowers. These John tales, High John the Conqueror is such a fascinating character to me because he bridges these two different worlds, right? He bridges existing in freedom, soaring above the sky in Africa tales. And he also is a part of African American history, as a slave. You read different parts of his story from different storytellers. And so combining and juxtaposing those different character traits, I think, makes for a really interesting character. And so there's the story of High John the Conqueror and how he using his shadow crow, this crow that can, it's giant, can carry people. He lifts up enslaved people, takes them outside of time, and allows them to escape briefly from this torment that they're being that is being inflicted upon them. And so you see his shadow crow in Tristan Strong, and you see how he's able to step outside of time. But you also see the conflict within High John and these two worlds of being free and being enslaved, and what he wants to do in order to free himself and others like him from that position. So I had to do a lot of research for Tristan Strong, but you would be surprised in that a lot of that research was me sitting down with a pen and paper and trying to recall, the folk tales and the mythology that I heard as a child, right? It's like, okay, yeah, I remember the Anansi tales. Which one stuck out to me? Which one, which was scary, which was interesting, which was funny. And I made a list of those. And then it was like, all right, trying to track down folk tales are very hard because folktales, they change. When I'm speaking to students, when I would do school visits, I would tell them that folktales change depending on who tell them and when they tell them. And so finding the exact folktale that you might have heard 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or yesterday can be difficult. The point of a folktale, it's a story and it's meant to be shared. And stories, when you pass them along, if you've ever played that old favorite telephone game. Stories can change depending on as person adds and subtracts from them. So a lot of my research was remembering what I had heard, and then trying to find other storytellers. Now, there are storytellers with professional titles called oral historians. Some of them, like Zora Neale Hurston, wrote the High John the Conqueror tale that I told you before about. Others, like Henry Louis Gates Jr., goes around and collected folk tales. And so I did a lot of research of reading Henry Louis Gates Jr., Virginia Hamilton, Zora Neale Hurston, trying to find those stories. And then a lot of research was just me finding out how to tell a good story. And that when you're reading a story, it's completely different from when you're listening to a story. You might hear voices. Someone might do voices. The cadence, the rhythm, the melody might change. And so a lot of my research was not necessarily what stories to tell, but how to tell that story. Transferring or translating a oral story to a written story does present some challenges. And the way that I find that I overcome them is to read the story aloud, to hear how it sounds. I might find that a sentence is written beautifully on the page, but when I read it out loud, it's long, it's cumbersome. There's no commas or space for the reader to breathe, in order to gather a breath and to continue. And so I would go back to the drawing board. I would scratch it out. I would find new words, insert periods, insert commas or semicolons, to try and break it up, to try and it's almost like writing poetry. Like you want to find the right form and the right structure for that story so that it sounds wonderful when being read aloud, but it reads well as well. Writing your own version of a myth or a legend, I mean, it can sound intimidating. You'll have a lot of detractors, a lot of people who say, oh, that's not what John Henry's hammer was supposed to look like, or that's not what Anansi was supposed to sound like. And what you have to realize is that you have to write the version of the story that you find that attracts you, that sparks wonder in you. For me, it was writing Anansi. He's a trickster character. But what is a trickster character? Is he always playing jokes? Does he have puns? Or does he just always have like a sly smile? And so you're never quite sure if he's telling the truth or if you need to get a second opinion. Write the version of the story that speaks to you, the one that's inside of you. Because at the end of the day, you're the one who's going to enjoy it. Whether someone else wants to read it, whether someone else wants to read it aloud, it doesn't matter. Write the story that matters to you. In Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky, you got to meet some incredible characters. But when I was writing them, I realized that a lot of the characters that Tristan was meeting, a lot of the folk heroes, a lot of the mythological gods, they were all men. And so in Tristan Strong Destroys the World, you're going to meet even more incredible characters. You will meet folk heroines and you will meet goddesses that are just as thrilling and just as tricky, just as loud and rambunctious as you met in book one. But there will still be Gum Baby. Don't worry. Tristan will still be fighting to save the world. Don't worry. But it's called Destroys the World for a reason. So I'm sorry. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for having me. Thank you for reading and supporting my books. Thank you for reading and supporting your libraries, your local libraries, or whether it's the Library of Congress. Thank you for being readers. Thank you for enjoying stories. And hopefully I'll get to read one of yours in the near future.